Welcome to the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast Season 2, where we are developing, inspiring, and empowering youth leaders. In today's episode, we are discussing prevention and community organizing.
Hello. Welcome. My name is Raylette Johnson, and I am so honored to be here today and be a host of the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast. Welcome. Yes. And I have two lovely guests with me. Please state your name, your organization, and your relationship to youth-led programming.
Good afternoon. My name is George Hicks. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, with Arc Builders, where we build community and communities. And I am an adult ally in Ohio.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Johnson, and I'm with TTJ Group LLC, and we are based in Mansfield, Ohio as one of our locations, and I am an adult ally trainer and proud to be here.
Thank you. And today's topic is prevention and community organizing. Okay, prevention and community organizing. So let's get right into it. So today we are discussing community organizing and prevention. So to get us started, it may be helpful to describe each. So what is community organizing? Mr. Johnson.
Yes, community organizing is a methodology that it really started back in the early 1900s in terms of building communities to collectively connect with each other in a way to have a voice, if you will, around certain issues. Back then it was the housing issues, it was some other political issues, and as it grew, you began to see community organizing take place in the 50s with the civil rights movements, and then as well as of late with the issues that we've seen with social justice, like George Floyd and others that have impacted our communities, and communities are starting to organize around key issues and key concerns. And so that's how community organizing has started and has been an important part of the fabric of our country.
And Mr. Hicks, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we think of community organizing as a new thing, like Mr. Johnson said. It's been around a long time, particularly when the migration from the South took place in the 20s, 6 million people from the North, and we came up from the South.
Yes, sir.
And we needed safe places to go to. So all across the Midwest, community organizations were formed, yes, formally and informally, for protection, employment, like housing, like Mr. Johnson said.
Yes.
All right, now preach. Drop that mic,
yeah.
Mr.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to say
something. So who typically participates in community organizing initiatives?
Well, one of the things, so many examples, it's a range of folks. And one of the things I've seen is the importance of as of late, young people really playing that critical role in community organizing more than ever before. It is something about this generation that sees itself as a voice in the community. But in the past, it was adults who were fighting and arguing and dealing with issues of housing despair, civil rights despair, other things that impact local communities. The greatest thing about community organizing, it starts at the local level, y'all, and that local level builds itself to the county level, state level, regional level, and then ultimately national level. But the awesome thing about community organizing with young folks is that they have the energy, they have the vision, and they want to learn the direction of taking it. So they take risks. And what we've seen as of late, the impact of Black Lives Matter and the impact of that community organizing style has crossed its values and impacted hundreds of Fortune 500 companies nationally. And so young people as of late have been those those key folks involved in community organizing, in my opinion.
And you know what's amazing too is that, like you said, this past year, even during COVID, the older generation, we are looking back and saying, you know, these cats, they in the street, they make a change. I said, as soon as it's over, I'm gonna be out there with you. But
I join you there.
Thing, yeah, go ahead, man.
Yeah, you know, joining things that, you know, they's like, hey, many of us was in the streets on the house looking at them on TV when them young folks didn't care. They was out there because the cause, community organizing is about the cause, and it's usually a positive cause to impact a broader group of people. So uniquely about community organizing, it's really the word community is what it's about, and the word community is unity. And so within community organizing is that impact of community to really begin to say, you know, enough is enough, and we're not going to take it anymore. And so it's usually done in a way that sort of builds effective change, positive change, that moves actually a nation and actually moves the world, what we've seen as of last year during the pandemic.
Nice. So well said, gentlemen. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Now, our listeners may be familiar with the field of prevention, but how would you describe prevention?
Traditionally, prevention is to delay the onset of negative behaviors, AOD, drug and alcohol, mental health, now suicide prevention, gambling. It's just to delay the onset of these negative behaviors.
That's a good point. That's a good point. You know, and prevention is really about supporting people who are struggling and giving them resources to help them succeed. In addition to what George is saying, it's really prevention, you know, is really a collection of culturally appropriate sort of that evidence-based programs and activities which really keep people moving into misuse and abuse or substance use disorder. You know, prevention is what we make it, because prevention is about impacting and optimizing ultimately that well-being of our individual selves as well as our neighborhoods and our communities.
Yes. So who typically then participates in prevention initiatives?
That's a great question.
Good question.
When I think about prevention, when the historical perspectives of prevention came around, you know, it was based around that whole idea of, you know, when you talk about the 50s and the 60s, it was mostly focused on sort of that late teenage and early adult population that was dealing with, you know, in the 50s you had heroin, so they had scare tactics, right? Yes. In the 60s they had psychedelics and they had scare tactics then. But in the 70s, we began to see sort of more of the educational when they was dealing with drug abuse issues and that whole war on drugs, if you will. And then in the 80s came that Just Say No campaign. And that became where the young people really began, the age began to drop from that sort of 17 to 24-year-old population to more of that 7 to 17-year-old population. The idea was that the earlier the better, to help decision-making skills and help opportunities for self-esteem grow. And then in the 90s, we've seen research-based risk and protective factors impact our communities, as well as community-based collaborations really begin that thing. And that was more, again, away from young people, but more of everybody, a more broader community, sort of even almost like community organizing approach. And then as of late in the new decade, in the new century we have, is really how do you take that connection of prevention and connect it with mental health and behavioral health. And, you know, so now we begin to see even a broader group of folks. And now we see prevention go from babies to seniors in terms of that whole situation. So the strategy in prevention and who's been involved has tremendously changed over the years.
And, you know, Tracy, I thank you. I agree. That's powerful, man. And, you know, I really like the whole continuum of care when you begin to think of it, particularly now, and even adding promotion to that. It's
Yes.
like the
Yeah.
community we're working with, if we
That's
can deal with
powerful.
promotion,
Ah,
6, you know,
that's critical, man. You're right.
yes, that's really critical. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you take that whole promotion piece and you take it and you build from it the idea that these strategies are designed to create sort of that environment that you promote good
Yeah.
change, good solid peace, and then you crosswalk that with community organizing.
Yes,
That's
sir.
really what we've seen this last year in terms of issues of violence, issues of racism and social justice, issues of even and voters' rights. I mean, we've
Yeah.
seen that community organizing take place because of promotion, and it's impacting all individuals, young, old, black, white, male, female, rich, poor. It has been that promotion piece. You're right, George. In my opinion, it has played a critical role in moving
Critical.
the continuum of prevention and using that continuum of care to really impact that. So that's a great point in my opinion.
I know our listeners are saying, you gentlemen are on fire. Let me just first and foremost say that. You guys are on
Calm
fire
y'all
here.
down, huh?
Okay. So you
Yeah,
all
right.
started, yes. So you all started to touch base on this when describing what community organizing and prevention are. But what are some key differences and similarities between the two fields?
Mm,
Yes.
that's a good question. That's a good question. George,
I
I'll
think
let you
like
to go
what
first.
Tracy said, and I know he'll pick it up. I'm just provoking him. Community organizing, and particularly historically, right? It dealt with a whole range of issues. And maybe prevention dealt with maybe drug and alcohol issues. It was
Yes, yes,
narrow. It was
yes,
more narrow scope.
yes,
And whereas now it's being expanded, especially CSAP strategies or
yeah,
community-based process,
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
you don't have a community-based process and you're not going to deal with that
Real talk, real talk.
real AOD stuff. So
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I didn't need to expand on that, bro. You hit it. You hit it right on the head. I think when you think about that, I say to myself, just like you just said, the difference at that time was it was just community organizing was really organizing for all kinds of concerns, like George said, and prevention was really focused on just a group of folks who. The idea was that it's a certain group of people who just needed some prevention work, and it was around substance use and that kind of thing. But as of late, we've seen almost a convergence of similarities in terms of prevention and community organizing, because community organizing was about organizing the community towards a common goal to impact positive change, and substance and prevention, violence, substance abuse, or whatever, is really now you realize that you can't do it alone. You can't live out there on an island by yourself, that it takes, as George said, community-based processes to do it, to make real substantive change. I mean, one great example that we've seen is tobacco. I mean, it was community organizing that started it, but prevention was still a part of it. And when they converged at the right point,
Yes.
they began to impact. And now you can't even smoke in parks.
that's
Outside.
Wait a
That's
minute.
right.
Yes. So
And
you're
so,
saying community organizing, when it merged with prevention, you ended up with a policy
a
change.
major
Right.
policy
Ooh,
change.
drop
Major.
the mic, fella.
Yeah,
Drop the
major
mic.
policy.
And you were talking about earlier about Black Lives Matter and social justice and stuff. And like you said, the younger kids were out there, or younger people,
Yeah.
excuse me. And when we put together this prevention strategy with that community-based organizing they did, this is going to be off the hook, because those young people, all they need are evidence-based frameworks to really take their work, like you said, to policy.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And the unique thing about community organizing and prevention, if I had a formula, I would say community organizing plus prevention equals adult allies.
There you go.
I mean,
Okay.
and so if I had to sort of put that formula on a chalkboard, you all, and that would be to me the formula that impacts, and that's the beginning. Adult Allies it's still to me is an infancy. I mean, because it hasn't impacted, but it clearly brings together what we know as that empowerment process. Yes. And that's what community organizing is about. Yes. It's about empowering folks. And now we begin to see prevention really take on that task of empowerment and engaging people to know that if you're going to really make substantive change and get drugs out of your neighborhood, violence out of your neighborhood, human trafficking out of your neighborhood, domestic violence out of your neighborhood, if you're going to get those out of your neighborhood and out of your communities, it takes community organizing. It takes a community of folks working together to impact. If you're going to get COVID out of your neighborhood, it takes community organizing.
That's right.
And so what we've seen is a great example of community organizing and prevention work when we've seen COVID, because the idea of people having to do the three things of wear, watch, and wash. And then at the same time, understanding those prevention pieces, but also organizing to get some changes done so we can get vaccines and other things to impact communities. You've seen this convergence, and more folks are, we have a vaccine, but we still now have a strategy to really make change from this point forward. I will probably wash my hands more than I ever did for the rest of my life.
Yes, ever. And might wear a mask.
Right, wear a mask for the rest of my life. That's right. Yeah. It's a mask time,
Michael Jackson wasn't too far off.
He had one glove. He had one glove, but you put them both on, hey. Let me do the dance.
I love it. And so you gentlemen have literally answered the question that I was going to pose to you on how the two fields complement each other. But what could they learn from each other to move forward? Now, Tracy, you kind of touched on that, but because talking about bringing them together, which equals, adult allies. So what can really move that process forward?
Well, it's really a natural fit, isn't it, Tracy? It's just a natural fit. If you really are doing prevention, you are doing some community organizing.
Yes, you are.
And if you're doing some community organizing, you're doing prevention.
Yes, that's so well said, George. I think you're right. I mean, it's almost interchangeable with each other. Yeah. I mean, because if you're going to impact communities, you got to impact communities in a community organizing fashion. I loved it. I mean, back in my earlier days with prevention, ancient years ago, we thought, by giving out balloons to 30 kids, we've done great prevention. But now we realize that you have to impact the multiple strategies, the comprehensive array of impacts of family lives to really make change. And how does that going to happen? You gotta have community organizing. One great strategy of community organizing is environmental strategies approaches. That's a great piece. That's how tobacco prevention and cessation has started, because of environmental strategy approaches. And that's community organizing, but more of a technical term for us to use. But really, it really is community organizing, because it's about changing community norms. And that's what community organizing is really about. And I give a lot of credit to communities of color. My heroes, Dr. King and those folks in the 50s and the 40s and the 60s, of really sort of bringing to this day the importance of sort of community norm change. Because if you get community norm change, you get policy change. You get policy change, you get behavior change. You get behavior change, and at the end of the day, you start seeing awesome solutions taking place in your community. And both community organizing and prevention have, to me, our brothers and sisters in the same family.
There you go. And like you said, us older cats, I think it took me time to think about even my own family. I have to give them honor.
Right on.
Again, I go back in the 30s when they came from Mississippi, first to Chicago and then Ohio.
Yes, sir.
And when they got there, the churches and the faith-based people, they had employment ready, they had jobs. There was a community norm, there were safe places.
Yes, it was. Yes,
Look
it
at this.
And
was.
then from there we go to model cities, right?
Isn't that
That's
amazing?
all community. That's all
That's
community
that's all
organized
that is.
and
And
driven.
one of the things, I was in Mansfield at our office in Mansfield, Ohio last month, and I was looking at the book called Green Stamps, and how the Green Stamps was community
Uh-oh.
organizing.
Yes, sir.
Because
Yes.
as a person of color, I remember my parents and riding around with my parents, and they had this Green Stamp book, and
Yeah.
in that book was about of community organizing nationally.
Yeah.
What roads, what gas stations to stop at, what stores to stop at, what hotels to stay in, on your way driving around this
Mm-hmm.
great country, what we call the United States. But that we know that there was only safe places for certain people
Right.
of color back then in the 50s and 60s to drive around in. And so the Green Stamp movement allowed, sort of in a community organizing fashion, allowed us to do prevention work. And prevent ourselves from being hurt and our
Yeah.
family members from being hurt in terms of the nonsense, the social justice issues that they were undertaking back then. So the convergence of community organizing and prevention has played its part. And if we all think about it, those that are at home listening to us
Mm-hmm.
and watching us, just think about, where did that play a role in your life, where
Mm-hmm.
you had to do it in school, in your communities, nationally. So I think that's an awesome piece.
Wow, we are truly getting a history lesson here. And that is so true. I just learned about the book, the Green Book, what was it, several months ago?
Right.
And I
Mm-hmm.
actually saw it. It was truly amazing. But let
Yeah.
me ask you, gentlemen, this. In your experience, what lends itself well to community organizing? What lends itself well to prevention? And how do you know when to use one or the other, or maybe both? Let's get your opinion on that.
Well, I'm going to say one thing about prevention
Mhm.
and about community learning. It's relationship, relationship,
Mm.
relationship.
Amen.
Put some music on.
Yes,
That's what it
sir.
is.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I thought you had the music back there,
I
George.
know.
I see that big mic. I'm like, where's the
Hey,
music at?
hey, and so Ray, like, going back to that original question that you just asked,
Hmm.
well, can you read that first part so I can make sure I get it?
Yes. In your experience, what lends itself well to community organizing?
Okay. Well, I think the broad sense of community organizing that lends itself well
Hmm.
is, as George said, he hit it out the park with the home run. It is community, or it is relationships. It's about knowing people. In other words, I can't know someone without doing community organizing. It is community, and the only way that common unity can take place, or we can commune ourselves, is that we have to build a relationship and connect with each other. And so relationship is the first and most foremost thing, George, that you touched about. And then the next thing that's critical in community organizing is trust. Is that after you
Yes.
have that, it's about having that trust with each other, that your word is the word that we're going to, your word means something, and you follow through on that word, and that has a lot of inference in that. So, community organizing really builds yourself on relationships and trust, and those are the things. If you had to flip the coin for prevention, those are the
Mm-hmm.
things that build coalitions in prevention.
Yeah.
Is relationships and trust. And so their similarities are there. And in prevention, we need relationships, in my opinion. And so I think that's some of the strength that what George is doing with Art Builders. He's in the community. He's building trust with young folks and adults and different populations, from Africans to Asians to African Americans to Latinx populations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about relationship building. And no matter if you're doing community organizing or you're doing prevention, they still have to cross that line of the nexus, in my opinion, of relationships and trust.
And when you agree, Tracy, and then you have to listen, don't you?
Bottom line, I was
I
just
mean, because then the community gonna talk to you.
yes, they will.
We
Yes,
can
they
go
will.
in with a plan and what
Yep.
we think,
Yeah, here's my plan. Yeah, you're right.
and we
No,
get in there and the trust. once the trust is built, they begin to say, okay, this is where I'm really at.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But once the trust is built.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And then the
Yes,
unique thing is about it, my grandfather used to tell me, boy, the good Lord gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a
There you
purpose.
go. For a purpose.
You're supposed to listen more and then talk more. And so if you listen more and you listen like you just said, George, and then you'll build that trust in that, and as you build that relationship. And that's critical. But everybody don't want to go down that path. Folks don't want to be, many times in prevention, I'm supposed to do these module programs. I'm supposed to do them before the semester is over with, and it's time to do it. And I got to do it now. It don't have any value, especially in communities of color, if you're not coming in and trying to build trust. I remember working in my role as a director of training and technical assistance for one of SAMHSA's projects and going to the Native American population. And many times in the region in Michigan, going to the Native American population, and you're supposed to start at 9, they don't start to 10. And then they start off at 10 talking about they want to see if you can build a relationship. And then once you do that, you build trust. And then you end like no problem after that. And so that's important. It's really important. Those are the 2 nexus. So George, you hit it right there on the head.
No, I've had the honor, like you said, to work with the Asian population around the gambling.
Okay.
And people say, how you doing this? Forever in Ohio, it was an issue that we need to deal with. And nobody, I'm not saying no one, but we were struggling.
Right.
And because of a relationship that was built on trust, my friend Danny Nam opened the door to the Asian community.
And that was a key right there, right?
Absolute key.
That was a key.
And so now we're going deeper with levels of them talking to us like we never had before. It's just fascinating.
It really is. But it's all about relationship building, both community organizing, and prevention. They both take those 2 ingredients of relationship and trust. And that means I can't implement ABC program without building that human relationship, knowing what their WIFM is, their WIFM, what's in it for me.
For me.
Yeah, yes, so you got to know what their WIFM is. And once you know what their WIFM is, and you build that relationship, they'll trust you. And once they trust you, then they're going to expect that the trust and the dedication will continue. And that's important. And in both community organizing and in prevention, that's critical. And I think that's the situation that maybe some of our communities are dealing with law enforcement. It's about building relationships and building trust.
Well said.
And so that's why prevention is probably really good for a lot of ills, and community organizing is really good for a lot of ills in our community. So you as preventionists can really build on really bringing communities together, no matter what the topic is.
Yes, well said. Well, once again, for our listeners, you guys are listening to the Ohio Adult Allies podcast with our special guests, Tracy Johnson and George Hicks. And so as we wrap this up, gentlemen, what final piece of advice would you give to our listeners out there? What final piece of advice would you give to our listeners out there? Talk to them.
I'll go first because Tracy will wrap it up. Like he said, youth led, and I'm going to go back to youth led and adult allies, is a booming infancy. We're in our beginning stages.
Yes, sir.
But the potential of empowerment for our young people and for our communities, there's no limit to it. I would just encourage everybody to learn about youth led, learn about what it means to be an adult ally, because the principles there can transform a community and do prevention.
Wow, bro. How you ask me to follow that?
No, you're covered.
Man, please. Ditto. I'll leave you with these things. I call it the 5 P's of important community organizing. And you got to have the passion. The first P is you got to have the passion. If you got the passion, then that's a good start. But then you got to have the presence in the community. If you're going to have the presence in the community, that's secondly. Then you got to have the prestige where people know that you are who you say you are. You do what you say you do, and you follow what you say you follow. So if you got the passion, the presence, and the prestige starting out, that's important. But then, then the fourth P is that really moving. You got to have the people supporting you. That's the fourth piece. But the one that really lacks us and hurts us the most is that we got to have a process. Community organizing without a process, prevention without a process, using that strategic prevention framework as a process, using whatever tools you have as a process, both as an organization, what we're trying to do, programmatically process, those are critical. Because that's what I like about Adult Allies, is that it embodies and is focusing on those 5 Ps, or what we use in our company as important strategies to build community organizing and prevention work around the country. So I think if you don't know about Ohio Adult Allies, you got to check out the website. If you do know about Adult Allies and you're not telling nobody else about it, shame on you. Shame on you. And at the end of the day, it's really about building communities using community organizing and prevention equals Ohio Adult Allies.
Ooh, yes, so well said. And you can check them out at ohioadultallies.com. Go there, check them out. Oh, amazing. And once again, this is Raylette Johnson coming live to you. And thank you for being a part of the Ohio Adult Allies podcast. Thank our special guests, Mr. Tracy Johnson and Mr. George Hicks. You guys were amazing. You were on fire. You Thank you so kindly. Ohio and everyone, have a great day, gentlemen.
Peace.
Peace. Bang.
Thank you for joining us today on the Ohio Adult Allies podcast. If you would like more information on our work, visit us at ohioadultallies.com. You can find more episodes on Spotify, iTunes, and other platforms by searching Ohio Adult Allies.